core group kind of got together and said, "Hey, we kind of try and move some people around," but there's been some resistance for that.
Okay. Yeah, get that burp, girl. Sorry, trying to burp on the milk here. Uh, okay, so I guess okay. So let me get to my second big one here. Is every alliance for your three and the officers, let's just say the management team, right? So your officers and your leads for your three alliances, is everyone in those three alliances on board for wanting to try and get this done? It's just a matter of figuring it out, or is there some resistance in pockets?
I think, at least for my team, I think Tom can also speak to this. I don't see any resistance to it because it can mostly benefit us. But that's just my team. I'll let the other alliances speak for themselves.
Okay.
Well, I think for interest, everyone is okay with balancing the alliances, but we had some problems because spenders threat to leave or would like to come back because of a lack of activity in the other two alliances. So this is just the things that we hear from those spenders.
Yeah. So, like my alliance, we went in with submitting positions, our four positions filled. By the time we got to Final Kingdom, we had to replace three more. So we've had to basically materialize for our fours out of what we had at the time. So, and I can see why that would harm our activity.
Okay. Okay. I mean, what again? Obviously, if it's only 10 days in, are all three of the alliances either max capped or with one spot open currently? Each one,
I have to go in and check, but my alliance should be full. We're second place. Here, I can grab my iPad and check that real quick.
Okay.
Can
Are all the alliances doing tech or activity audits or power growth audits or whatever?
Yes.
Okay.
On Sunday, but we are missing.
We're trying. My alliance is trying, but we actually had the spots we had to replace were actually my data officer, which was never filled, and my membership manager had to be replaced. So we are trying to get it done, but there's still some bumps in the road, if that makes sense.
Okay. Okay.
Because they're trying to get
Okay. Let me see.
their feet under them, you know?
Okay. So let me see. So spaces at EW is a couple spaces, EE is max, and EO is max. Okay. What percentage would you say each of the, I guess based on whatever the most recent audits are for each of those three alliances, what percentage out of 100 would you say comfortably or even conservatively you feel is its activity?
Yeah, I'd say for an average order, we have an average is probably about 12 to 15 online at one time. Although we did hit a nice 24 this morning. Things were looking up this morning.
Gotcha. How so maybe I should rephrase that. How about dead weight? How about just inactivity? Like just how many? Like if you were to say, the most recent audit we did on our alliances, we have 90 out of 100 people that are active, right? So we're at give or take 90% activity. With ones that are like how is that? I think my data or my member officer, who's not here unfortunately, can speak more to that than I can. Okay. But I would probably say probably 60, 70. I'm not 100% sure, and I'm probably intentionally underestimating that number. Okay. Okay. Because I'd rather underestimate and get really good results than overestimate and have things go sideways. Okay. No, I got you. Okay. All right, so let me see. Buo says 0 inactivity. I imagine that's for EMP. And then EE. Yeah, if there's any inactivity reports,
That's zero. We kick them immediately and just get them out.
Okay, okay. Um, oh no,
All
no,
the
no. I mean
metadata
I mean no.
that we have to collect manually.
Okay. No, that I mean again, that still helps a lot. Okay. All right. So the next one here would be when the first few days started. Was it pretty close in power? I guess how soon did you start noticing it spreading, and then what was there a conversation at that time with everyone or no, not necessarily. Day two.
Um, I I think I'm not 100% sure, but I would say within a couple of days is when it started happening.
Okay.
Um, I don't know what Spacey was seeing, and he's honestly been more on it than I have. I have felt like I feel like we're doing okay, but not amazing. But Spacey's been the one who's a little bit more upset about it, and
Okay.
that's understandable.
Okay. And then okay, so okay, disperse it day two. Okay, thanks for that for you and Z. Okay, and then so before I kind of start getting into what I think would be like solution conclusion mode here, when you started when anyone started noticing it, was there a conversation at all, or was there a meeting set that says, hey, look, we need to meet with management and just basically try to come up with a solution on how to address it, whether that be around day two or anytime after?
I think again, kind of waited a couple days to kind of see if this was, a temporary blip, or if it was an actual like problem. But I would say, within 4 or 5 days, kind of started talking about it.
Okay. Okay, got it.
If I'm remembering my timeline, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Um, I think I have enough to go off of. Has anyone here seen that recent movie? Has anyone here seen any of the Knives Out movies? Out of curiosity, with what's the Daniel? What's his name?
Yeah,
Daniel Craig.
it's been a hot minute, but yeah,
No.
yeah,
The Knives Out, like the detective,
I have.
right? Knives Out. Okay. Um, it's okay. I was gonna make a
Yeah,
Knives Out reference. I feel like I'm. What's that guy's name?
I mean,
Blanc. What's his name? The detective
but
guy.
I'm not sure that I would get it just because it's been a while.
No problem. I can go Inspector Gadget, just depending on how many years I have to go back here. But yeah, all right. Let me see. Let's turn it real quick so Daddy can get into his spiel, if you know what I mean. All right, thanks, Daddy. Andre said, "Can we hear you?"
Yeah.
Oh, I just heard something.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you okay? I don't know why you're eating your hand. Yeah, Andre, I think we heard you just for a sec though, and then it cut out. Okay, so let me scoot this over. So I think there's a few points based on what I've heard so far. So let me just kind of start with some triage, and then I'll go into what I think are some solutions. Out of curiosity, before I even get there, how many of you watched the 2777 video that Spacey messaged everyone with?
Honestly, I'm gonna be honest. I haven't had the time. I'm just getting done with the first week back at school after winter break, and I've been slammed. So,
Okay, no worries. And again, I'm
and
not.
I apologize.
No, please don't. Again, no worries at all. Okay, so again, I guess before I really dive in, Kong, Goa said they watched it. Okay, so just and if it's easier for you guys to type, no worries. But I'd love to hear how relatable do you think the 2777 video is to your situation that you have right now? Just before I kind of get into what I'm going to say, I'm just curious from your take for Kong and Goa. And obviously, for anyone else that has had some time to watch it. Okay. Oh wow. Okay, 70%. That's pretty high. Okay. Yeah, I mean, again, there's obviously going to be some differences just because that project for 77 had 6 alliances compared to 3. and just some different things that happened. But okay, but again, nice to at least hear that you guys found some similarities, because that definitely helps, especially because I broke that situation down, I thought, pretty deeply for all the impact areas. Okay, can you stop eating your hand here? Jeez. Here we go. Take that. All right. Good job, Fatty. I love you. Okay, so let me kind of get into the triage portion first. So I think there's a few things you have to consider when you look at the build up for what happened kind of jump prep up until where you're at here. Usually one of the most important things that you typically want to try and do and I'm talking before you even get to jump, is a big part is about setting expectations early, right? And that type of, out of sight, out of mind, right? If someone doesn't hear about something, they don't see something they can read, if you're not doing things like weekly meetings, for example, as you're getting closer to your jump date, those are things that obviously can help mitigate those situations. And they also help set precedents. So that way, once you get into the kingdom, everyone is aware that you're going to do this thing, or you're going to do those things, or hey, this is something we talked about doing, so we're going to make sure that it gets done. And it also helps to reiterate that everyone from your management team is on the same page, right? So having things like detailed processes for, hey, this is how we're going to do this. This is how we're going to power balance. This is what officers have to be aware of, because typically in this type of a situation, officers are usually more of the impact zone, mainly because on average you're going to have more officers online than you're going to have a leader online, right? Just kind of given, in an average 24-hour period. And so what that means is that you're going to have more gatekeepers, right? Players that are able to accept or deny applications that are usually going to fall more on your officer team than it will your leader. And so, unless the lead is just, some type of crazy banana person and they're just, straight no-lifing it, just YOLO brick squad, and, they're, down in energy drinks. And
I mean,
killing it.
I'm close, but I also don't spend, so my power is just, it's just weak.
No worries. And so I guess where I'm going with that is setting those expectations early, right? With things like alliance mails, having your management meetings, having your town hall meetings, right? With everyone that's a part of the project, and then letting everyone know, and then more than that, I'm sure some of you, depending on your age, right, you might have heard of this term before. I absolutely love it. It's called continued education. And for anyone here who's familiar with continued education, I'll just give a very simple example. If you want to try and become a real estate agent, you obviously have to study, you take a test. Once you finish and let's just say you become certified, and now you can go and sell homes and etc. You then every couple years have to go back and take another test to show that, one, you're still working in the field, two, you're still up to date on the knowledge and what you need to know in order to navigate that specific field of real estate. This is actually pretty common in quite a few jobs. And the way that we look at continued education in game is by doing things like friendly reminders, right? So, I'm sure some of you are probably familiar with situations where it's kind of like, I'm sure for anyone here who plays sports, right? You've probably heard of that one and done type rule, right? For people that want to go from college to the pros, right? Typically done in what basketball, and I don't know what other sports that they do it. But the idea behind it is when you're sending information out, whether it's a Discord announcement, whether it's an alliance mail, whether it's a King's mail, most of the time, most kingdoms and most projects usually operate almost passively, indirectly, without even knowing it, in this type of one and done mindset, where you'll send something out and you're like, oh man, this is great. I typed this up really well. This is formatted beautifully. I really think this is going to connect with a lot of people. And you'll send it, but then that's it. You don't send anything else when it comes to a follow-up, a friendly reminder, something to reiterate and constantly keep it fresh in people's minds so they don't forget, right? And that kind of leans into the whole out of sight, out of mind, right? If you're not constantly doing it, right, very similar if you're trying to learn a language, right? You're not just going to go into one class and try to learn a new language, and only do it there. You're going to take the class, you're going to go home, you're going to talk to someone who hopefully speaks that language, so you can basically hammer out your retention and your muscle and your memory development on multiple fronts. And it's kind of a similar mindset where you look at how you approach it in this situation. So I would say, one, that's kind of the build-up. Two, I think I think with where you're looking at now, with where you guys are, is right. It's. I mean, I don't want to say drastic, but I think it has to be a few things, right? You either, and there's I think a couple ways you can approach it. So, given you're only 10 days in, you do have a few outs. So one would be, which I think is the most obvious, is if you chose to keep the status quo, which essentially just means you don't do anything and you leave it as is, but then you try to start working it going forward. An example of that would be kind of branching in one to two combined areas. Either you do a full status quo and you leave it the way it is and you just keep going down this path, and then you basically try to replenish and fill when migration opens. And then you'll basically only fill into the number 2 and the number 3 alliances, right? So number 1 would not get anything until number 2 and 3 are able to get within a power range to number 1. So that's one option.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about earlier before you showed up is, hey, if nothing else, we can push migration into 2 and 3 only in hopes to get them caught up.
Yeah. So like I said, I think that's one option. Option 2 would be you start proactively working it now up until that point. So, for example, what you would do is any strong players that should want to apply to the number 1 alliance will be automatically denied, and they'll be advised and then explained, right, which is where you would come up with some type of copy-paste template message, and that way officers and leaders that are in the number 1 alliance are able to message the people that apply, educate them, inform them, and let them know, look, in efforts so we can work on balancing out the top 3 alliances, our recommendation is to go to the number 2 or the number 3 alliance. And then that way, everyone from the number 1 alliance is on board, and then the number 2 and the number 3 alliance know what to expect. Essentially, what that means is that if any player from the number 4 alliance or lower wants to move up, they would funnel into 1 through 3. And then, of course, you would apply the same migration tactics once migration opens up. So that would be option 2.
Yeah, we are just now, like, migration has just barely opened, I think. Like, it might have been within the past couple of hours.
Yeah.
So we are just now trying to kind of get a handle on this before the trickle becomes a flood.
No, for sure. I understand. Option 3 would be where you essentially kind of do something a little more drastic. And the more drastic approach would be, all the leads and all the officers and players coming together, and then what you would do is you would basically tally up everyone. Yes.
I finished my food.
Okay, that's fantastic, sweetie. You are killing it. Can I get some boomsies? Boomsies? Okay. I'll be right back. Daddy's on an important meeting with some important people. That's probably an over-exaggeration, but I take it seriously. Yeah, I am. Yeah, that's my purple drink. Yeah, I really like how you said that. Thanks, Dave Chappelle. Okay, so let me. Sorry, that's the dad life right here. Option 3 would be where you could, like I said, this is a little more drastic, and it depends on the level of variation you'd consider. Option 3 would be where you would basically total all the players in all 3 of your alliances, and you would do a basically restart split distribution, right? So you basically total everyone up, you divide everyone by 3 for their power, and then you basically have everyone redistribute themselves between the 3 alliances, so everything's even. That is a little more drastic. It is fair, of course, across the board. And that's one way that you could do it if you're trying to kind of solve the issue like really fast and you just want to rip the Band-Aid off. Which again will work, but everyone has to be on the same page, right? And then you have to explain that information to everyone in kind of a trickling effect where, basically, you send out a synchronized alliance mail, you let everyone know on Discord ahead of time, and you say, look, this is something that we're planning to do that management has agreed because we think it's going to help. But then, if you did decide to do that, you have to have an action plan in place for how you're going to handle the funneling after that. Because remember, you can solve something, you can rip the Band-Aid off, but if you don't have a solid plan in place so that way this doesn't happen again, then it's all for naught, if you will. As my good friend from the Disney movie Brave, Merida, would say, right? It's all for naught. Actually, I think that was her mom, but that's okay. A lot of kids' references are going to be coming your way. So, but yeah, so essentially you have to have a game plan. Now, again, that's option 3. Option 4 would be if you wanted to kind of do a lighter version of a hard reset, and it would be more about splitting the top players, right? So you could say to yourself, okay, well, we're going to look at whoever the top 20 are, or let's just say if we keep it by divisibles of 3, say the top 18. So you take the top 18, the top 21, and then you say, okay, hey, right, we're going to split them. Specifically, you would do it in a way where it's to basically split up rally leaders, right? That's kind of the way that you would approach it. Is you say, look, we're going to split up rally leaders because we think this is something important to do before we eventually get to KVK, so that way we're already set to go. And then sometimes you can actually have a trickle effect that happens from that, where you'll then have some players that will kind of leave here and there, and that's something that can help you kind of set that expectation going forward, where even though it's not going to be an immediate fix, it will lessen the gap enough to where, or at least a little bit, to where it then makes it easier. In the long run, you'll take less time to fill, whoever the number 2 and the number 3 alliances are.
Well, I hate to interrupt you here, but there's also a interesting little wrinkle in this whole conversation, because there are a bunch of Japanese VTubers who have Jason Hall, but they aren't in the main alliances at all. They're kind of in their own little alliances that eventually I think they're just going to die off because they're so isolated.
Oh. You said your top 20 is filled with people from Eternals, and then Japanese people. 1 is Japanese. You said 5 out of 10 is Japanese players. I believe. Is that Despair? Is that 5 out of the top 10? Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, I'm going to pull the individual power rankings just to give you a snapshot.
Okay. And let me ask, where are those 5 players? Okay.
Who is the top 6? And I can
And are any of those Japanese players within the top 3 alliances or no?
No.
Okay.
I'm sending 2 screenshots.
Okay.
Now.
Okay, I see. Okay, cool. I actually don't think that's really that bad. And out of curiosity, has anyone had a conversation with those players? Has there ever been any interest in them wanting to join, or it's really just kind of them doing their own thing?
Honestly, it's them kind of doing their own thing because it's basically Japanese YouTube stars pulling in. Basically, from what I understand, VTube is basically a Japanese version of YouTube.
Yeah. Like I think the VTube is like where it's like they make an animated version of themselves, and then they basically are. It's like I think with a green screen or something, and then they're talking, but it's like they've put some type of cover that just makes them look animated. Yeah, it was pretty popular on Twitch. I guess it maybe still is, depending on who's still doing it, but. Okay, let me see. So we basically said we did make a group chat with all of our spenders in game and explained to them already that we think balancing alliances is a good idea and something we should try. However, most have replied with, "I want to stay in Everest." Yeah, okay, that makes sense. It's okay. That makes sense. Okay, so again, I know I gave a couple examples here of a couple solutions I think can work, right, depending on the triage. Let me explain first off before I kind of get into commenting on what you said, Spacey, because again, I know I came late and I don't want to obviously keep anyone longer than you need to be, respectable of everyone's time. Is first off, right? I think if you're gonna get to a point eventually where you are able to close the power gap, and or even if you want to try and work on closing the power gap, every officer and every lead has to be on the same page, right? You have to have a process in place because, like I said, you can do any type of quick fix, but if you don't have a game plan for the long haul, then it's only going to happen again. And usually a very simple example of something you can do for this is you just set power caps, right? Or what you do is, and this might even be easier, right? Because it does depend on the situation on what might be best. But I think in your guys' situation, what I would recommend is you just close off accepting new players that are above a certain range for number one. So like when number one opens up new capacity, they try and take maybe more middle of the range or low to middle of the range players. And then that way everyone that's above, let's say, I don't even know what your guys' average power is here. Let me see real quick from whatever you just sent me. 4 mil. Okay, so like as an example, right? Like say that you guys say, okay, well, hey, anyone who's 500k and below or a mil and below, right, that is interested in wanting to apply to the number one alliance, right, they just won't get it, like anyone above that won't get accepted, right? So anyone below at 500k or below that wants to apply would do that, and then anyone who's above a mil or a mil and above, right, would get priority going to. And like I said, I'm just giving an example. I don't know what your guys' numbers are for your top 100 and your number 200 and your 300 bubble players, as far as what that power is. But this is an example of something that I can tell you. Let me see. You said lowest player in Empress is a mil. Okay. Yeah. So So an example of that would be, like let's say you go 500k, 600k, something around there. Again, as an example, and you would say we'll accept anyone that's at that or below. Anyone above that will go to the second and the third alliances. And then that what that does is two things here. Think of it like a sandwich. You're basically squishing it from the top and from the bottom, right? So you're limiting the growth on the top. So so instead of the growth on the top going like this, it's going slowly, right? And then at the bottom, you're pushing that fast. So the bottom is going faster now in growth, and it allows for your number 3 and number 2 alliances to catch up to number 1 at a faster pace. But that requires every officer and every lead in the number 1 alliance to know exactly what to do, right, when someone applies based on their power. They have to know that they're going to message them, they're going to give them a template message, and then if those people have questions, they're either going to be able to answer those questions for that player, or they're going to direct them to someone who can answer the questions for the player. Because trust me when I say, right, for any of you who have worked a customer service job, the point that you're at right now, and really at a lot of points within a kingdom, it's very much a customer service type job. You basically have to be human resources and internal affairs. You have to know how to talk to people, and the way that you word things is just as equally as important, because you don't want to come off rude or negative or curt or short with people. You want to come off informative and being able to explain yourself well enough to where when you do that, the person's response in the ideal situation is, you know what, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for taking the time. I'm going to go and reach out to the person that you just recommended me to, right? So it's, you explain the situation, this is why we're doing this. And then you give an in-game name and hopefully a Discord name of someone who can reach out to them, right? It's just like if you're referring someone to a business. You're not just going to say, oh yeah, hey, go over there on 9th and 12th and you'll find them. No, it's, you have to do your due diligence. So you let them know, hey, this is the alliance we recommend you going to. This is the player that we recommend you reaching out to. And then you reach out to that person and you let them know, hey, I just got done talking to someone. You can expect this person to be reaching out to you shortly, right? That way you're covering both your bases, right? This is essentially what we call in the business world kind of doing your due diligence. And again, if this maybe sounds a little too business-like for anyone, trust me when I say these are the types of things that if you want to be in a successful kingdom and you want to run a successful group, you really have to be willing to go the extra mile. And these are things that is really good for anyone to learn how to do, because it just makes you come across that much more professional, that much more well put together, and it helps you organize your efforts across the board in a more uniform way. So everyone's on the same page. Let me see here. Sorry, Despair said, one of our migrants said, I'm not sure to get Academy. When we offer them to join, it's on order who is tough. yeah, no, it kills me. And that's the other challenge that you guys might run into, right? Is that when migrants come in, I don't want to say often, because it does depend, but there is the chance that you're going to have some migrants who only want to join the Immortal Alliance. It happens. And that's why it's even on the migration side, it's just as important to have a single point of contact, or if you're unable to have a single point of contact who can basically run all migration efforts, then have two people. My recommendation is to have someone, right? If you're able to have one person coordinate between all three alliances, do it. Trust me, that's going to save you a headache. The reason why is because you don't want to have multiple conversations. You don't want to have situations where alliances are recruiting for themselves, right? Where you have leaders, officers, or members that are basically individually recruiting for my alliance. You don't want it to be my. You want it to be us. You want it to be we.
Grab the. Then we had a migration ad. Written up, and let me see if I can find it. It's basically just the point of contact is Spacey at this point, who is leader at number 3 currently.
Yeah, I mean, again,
2 and 3 have been
I'm sorry.
flexing over the past couple of days. I was just saying that 2 and 3, Empress Nord, we've been kind of leapfrogging over each other every couple of days.
Gotcha.
Our power's been in that much flex that
Gotcha.
one of us will hold 2, one of us will hold 3 for like 2 days, and then we'll switch.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, it's just like I was saying, it's just very important that you have. So, like, for example, like when I'm doing a project, right? Typically, we have a recruiting department. We have an announcement for that recruiting department. We have a chat. We have hot leads for that recruiting department, and then we have a channel that basically is like status updates. So just somewhere that we post. We typically have a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet will list out the person's name. It'll list out their ID, their Discord ID. It'll list out where they're coming from, their some of their details. It may have a special note, but then there's typically a column there where it says status update, right? That basically shows what status is that person at. Have we reached out to them? Have they replied? Have they joined a Discord? Have they sent screenshots, right? Like basically a status column that shows what have they done so far, because that will show you and allow for you to gauge a migrant's interest and if they want to come. And then usually we have a column that says have you explained, right? Like, did you explain to them the goals? Did you explain to them the expectations of the kingdom? And that usually is more of a general column. But typically what you would do there is you would explain, hey, we do power balancing. This is how we do MGE. This is our KVK goals. This is how the kingdom is currently, right? This is what we share, what we don't share, right? Basically giving kind of a full high-level rundown, and then you list that off, right? Then you would check that off and say, yeah, okay, someone has explained that to them. And you should be doing that with every single person that shows interest in wanting to migrate to your kingdom. No one is left out. And especially if you have like let's say you have a good kingdom, right, or a kingdom that has some potential, obviously you may have more interest than another, right? You might have more people that are wanting to apply, more people that are reaching out, and in those situations, everyone at the management level should be directing anyone. It doesn't matter who it is. I don't care if it's your uncle, your cousin twice removed, if it's Jimmy on the street who just got done, with his 12th stint in rehab. It doesn't matter. They should be funneling every single person to your single point of contact, or whoever, right, your group of migrants are. And then that way you allow yourself to stay a little more organized. Now, yeah, that may not account for everyone, but it's definitely going to account for more people than if you didn't have some type of system in place. And then from there, it becomes a lot easier to manage the expectations, to provide information, and then to place people appropriately. Right? Because remember, it's easier to place people into an alliance when they're coming in for the first time. Why? Because they don't know what they don't know. Right? You're basically explaining to migrants, this is how our kingdom works, versus trying to reshape a mindset for an individual that already is in your kingdom, right? So like someone said before, when I think someone posted into the chat where you're basically I think someone said something about, you reached out to the spenders and they basically just don't want to leave the alliance they're in, right? It's kind of like they're set in their ways. But when you have new players that are coming in, it allows for you to set new expectations with them appropriately. So it goes back to what I was saying, like they don't know what they don't know. They're hearing from you for the first time. So it makes it easier to then explain that to them and then place them appropriately into the alliances that you want to place them into. So if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, I personally gotten two two people reaching out to me saying, "Hey, individually, they're both like, I have about a mil power." I'm like, "Yeah, we can probably make room here." And of course, I was directing him to Spacey because he's kind of our head of the migration at this point. And I'm like, "Yeah, but if you guys want to come here," because I've known them and worked with them, I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And plus, it's getting off an old jumper rival, so that too.
Gotcha. Yeah. And, I think, something that's also really important for whatever you guys do is be transparent. And transparency can happen in a couple different ways. You can be transparent in just allowing every member of management to read something, even if they don't have the ability to post, even if they're not even involved in a specific department. One of the things I often do in my projects is we have all of the department channels for the announcements. Like an announcement for every department channel is always readable by every member of management. Even if they're not a part of that department or they can't post there, they are able to get updates, right? They can see what the most recent thing was posted, and it allows for them to be informed. So nothing is nothing gives them the impression that it's being done under the table, right? Or it's being done in secret or anything like that. And that's just one example, right, of something that you can do. One of the things we also did was have like a department status update announcement channel, and that basically is where someone would do a general write up on all of the departments and give like a weekly status update or whenever there was some big things that happened. So if it happened once a week or a little less than once a week or a little more than once a week, then that's what would happen. That's also a nice way to essentially kind of summarize your efforts and then post something so everyone's kind of in the loop. But like I said, I think with where you guys are at right now, I mean, I don't want to say it's awful because I don't necessarily. I mean, you guys are 10 days in, right? But what I would say is that out of those four or five solutions that I provided, I definitely think you would want to do something, because I mean, this is the thing. If it's what it sounds to me is that it's not necessarily a group lack of effort. It's more of a, hey, these players have already been accepted. Because this is the thing you have to imagine, and this isn't me calling anyone out, but I'm going to call it how I see it. At the end of the day, very similar to the 2777 situation that I had happen for my project. That was more of neglect from quite a few of the leaders and quite a few of the officers where and I want to point this out, right? It was just very weird. I mean, I've done what 8 or 9 projects now across 2 games. I've never had that happen. Like I've never had that level of just not caring from leads and from officers, where they're just like, we're just not going to do this, and we're just going to do whatever we want. I've never had that happen. So it was very shocking to me when it did. But your situation is very different than that, right? If you're telling me, hey, all of our leads, all of our officers are on the same page, and we all want the same thing, then it really just comes down to that group of players. So the challenge here, though, is that
This too is that we don't want to push any high spenders. We don't want to say you must go here, and then they go and join that
yeah,
Fit Six alliance. That if they gain enough power, it could be very nasty, even if they're on somewhat good terms with us.
100%, 100%, and the same thing is conversations I've had before with alliances, and that is always I would say a very rational and logical fear, if you want to call it that, where it's, hey, what if we all come together and we say, this is a good game plan we think is solid. It's going to require some players to move and to switch a little bit. And then they just hit you with, okay, well, we're just going to leave your alliance. We're going to make our own alliance, and then we're just going to terrorize the server. I mean, that's kind of worst case scenario. Or they join one of the alliances outside of the top 3, and they basically do the same thing. So, in that situation, like I said, me giving you a few solutions, maybe your next best solution is to just basically halt. Like I was saying, I think I mentioned like option 2 is probably a little bit more of what you guys might want to do at this point, at least maybe to try first in consideration, is where you just halt. You basically set a power cap for number 1, for whoever the number 1 alliance is. sorry, in this case, Empress, right? And you put that somewhere between, I'd say, 500 and maybe 750K, right? That'd be my give or take estimate based on you saying your lowest is a mil. Because you also have to consider how many players are not in your alliances, right? Because in order for in order for that to kind of start taking effect before you end up really hammering home migration, you would want to figure out how many players within the top 500 or that are above a mil are outside of your three alliances, because that's your range of the amount of players that may want to try and work their way up that you could then get funneled into number 2 and 3. Then you'd want to put a migration team together. Basically, if you're depending on how many people you can get, and you start reaching out to your what is it, the adjacent? Is it still plus minus 10 days from current, or is it just on your continent still? Someone would have to let me know on that one.
Let me. So, what are you asking? Like, how long the kingdom's been open?
No. So like the adjacent kingdoms that you can recruit to or recruit from, right? So like once your kingdom hits 10 days, you guys, I think if it's still 10 days, you should be able to start having players come in from other kingdoms and or applying. But usually there's a range. It should be like plus or minus 10 days, 10-day in age from your kingdom.
Not policy. In all honesty, no one has excuse language, but fucked with migration so much that I gave up trying to understand it a while ago.
No worries, no worries. I think it's something like that. But in short, right, that's step two. I would say is you put together a migration team, and you either have one person take one kingdom, or you have a few people, or sorry, you have one person take a couple kingdoms, or you have one person take each kingdom, depending on how many people you can get that help, and then you're just funneling people in. Oftentimes there's certain markers that you can look for when you're going out and you're trying to recruit, whether that be full alliances, half alliances, or just individual players, and then like I was saying, you funnel them to a single point of contact if you're able to. And then that's a good way to try and start mitigating before before actual or true migration opens up later. And so those are the two things I recommend doing. Right, is set a cap on number one, reach out to other players that are in your kingdom. Right, players that are in the number 4 ranked alliance and beyond. I would probably start with like somewhere around number 20. Right, anyone who's like in the rank 20 alliance and lower. And maybe see if you have some stragglers there. Maybe there's a couple individuals that might be around a mil or above, and if not, then you work your way down. Then you go 15 to 20, then you would go 10 to 15, something like that. And you're basically trying to get all of the players that could be strong, but they may just not be necessarily in a top 3 or a top 6 alliance. And that's what you do. So you start working your way up like that until eventually you get to the top 10, or you get to the top 8 or the top 6, right? And then maybe you kind of stop at a certain point, just because you may not necessarily want to come across as poaching, right, so to speak. So you kind of have to be careful with, how low in alliance rank, or how high, I guess you could say, in alliance rank that you do that for. But that's one effort. Then you have the power cap on the number 1 alliance, and then funneling anyone that applies to number 1 to number 2 and 3. That's number 2. And then number 3 is doing your current migration efforts for any of the kingdoms that could migrate to yours. And then number 4 would be, or the number 4 point on the action plan would then be once you eventually get to true migration and it opens up, right, then you can also work on balancing it out. So you really have 4 steps that you could apply right now that I think is a little more relevant to your situation that could help, but it will truly require everyone to be on the same page and a game plan. So, yeah. Are you giving me the nod of approval? Did Daddy do a good job? I think so.
All right, so I don't know if you're watching the chat, but
yeah,
they're starting to make conclusions down here, and I think I'm in agreement with most, if not all, of what is said.
Yeah, let me see. Merge with RIC will help activity. EE blocking the members to send them to UOW. New migrants will be sent to UOW. We'll do a text for people to explain. Announcement on Discourse. Explain. Let me see here. Last top 3. Wants to help balance alliances. Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, I think that's a good start. I think in addition to trying to find any stragglers that are outside of the top six or outside of whatever number of alliances you guys essentially don't want to piss off. That's probably a good way. It's probably a good way to start, and you just figure that out. If it's the number 7, number 8, you don't want to go lower than that. Whatever you think the threshold is, and then you're trying to reach out to players or alliances to maybe do things like merges or bring their active players. The thing I'll say about doing merges is, and this is something this is a big pro tip here, is be careful on how low of ranks that you consider doing merges on, just because it's so early right now. Merges, if you do them with any amount of healthy or active alliances, regardless if they're fully active or not, can, in most respects, be detrimental to kingdom growth and development. And it can hurt you more in the long run than you might think it'll solve. This is why usually in the beginning, like for projects I run, I never consider doing a merge with pretty much like anyone in the top 20 or the top 21. At least until things have really truly settled in zone 1 before you really consider whether or not that might be an option. Now again, it does depend on the overall kingdom's activity and how much true activity those specific alliances have, a little bit more, kind of in that 15 to 21 range. And then, eventually then when you look at like 10 through 15 or 10 through 14 at that point. But just be cautious with that, because you don't want to lose out on available shells. You don't want to lose out on, because a few things happen when you do a merge, right? When you do a merge, it's not just you merging so you can build activity. You have to remember what happens on the other end. The other end of it is that whichever alliance is not the one that you're merging into, there's always a chance you're going to have some player drop off, especially just depending on how well done the merge is, on how well executed it is or not. There's always a chance you're going to have some stragglers and people that don't migrate or that don't merge over, or if you're merging two active alliances and you are in a situation where you basically have to overfill, right? So an example is, let's say you have an alliance that has 100 capacity, but the alliance that you're going to merge them into, let's say you got 50 players that are coming in and it's going to push you to like 120 over 100. That's usually not something that you want to do, because then you're going to have to try and fill those 20 players into another alliance, and sometimes they may not feel good about that, where they can't get in right away, or if they have to wait to get in, like where you're going to try and do a queue type system. So just be cognizant of that, is that more often than not, it's actually better to work on merges that make sense, so that way you're not putting yourself in a position where you're trying to overcompensate or you're trying to overfill whatever the cap is for the alliance that you want to merge them in. Because remember, you can always work on merges at a later time, right? There's nothing stopping you from doing that. You essentially have all the time in the world. It's work on the merges that are more relatable, that make sense, and then you can always revisit merges as the alliances increase in player capacity as time goes on.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, that's it for me.
Kind of seems like we're starting to wrap up here. People are having to leave. So, is there any last questions from anybody or last comments from you, Boss Nancy?
She fell asleep in my arms. Yeah, no. I mean, again, if I just want to say, obviously, if there's anyone has any questions, you're more than welcome to ask. But I do want to say, I appreciate the space you reaching out, and obviously with the opportunity to come and meet you guys and come and talk. I like to believe that, I have a plethora, or at least a good amount of knowledge and experience when it comes to kingdom management and jump project management. It's one of the things I really specialize and focus on when it comes just to kind of in this scene, probably more so than any other content creator, so to speak, which is not a slight to any of them, but it's just something that I love doing.
I mean, we and I have our differences. I mean, we've clashed quite a couple times over stuff, but hey, as long as projects are doing well and succeeding, who can complain, right?
100%. I mean, I my hope really is that I think that's always the most important thing. It's one of the reasons why, when you look at on my channel, I have the most amount of management material across the board that I did on purpose. So that was my intent always, was to provide good content on how kingdoms can manage themselves better, so that way they can increase the chances of being successful, increase the chances of lasting as long as they can, increase the overall health of a kingdom. And then even for the jumper community, I have a lot of content that goes in just to prep, into how to build a project, how to sustain a project, how to maintain it throughout a jump phase. Once you get into Final Kingdom, how to set things up, just anything and everything. I mean, I have guides on how to manage an alliance, on how to be an officer. I mean, those are things that I was always very passionate about, because I just never saw that a lot of people did those, and I thought that they would hopefully be helpful to those that found them to be so. So, if anything, I want to thank Spacey for the invite, and I appreciate everyone here allowing me to speak. And obviously, if there was anything I said, even if I only said one thing that you took away as a positive, I'm happy with that as a minimum. So
Yeah, thank you. I think you've given us a lot to think about, and I understand you're a busy guy with work and obviously a young family there going on. So
yeah. See, she's knocked out. She doesn't care. She just listens to me talk. So
yeah, thanks for taking the time. I think at this point I can kind of just gonna say we're done. People are free to stay and talk if they want to. You gotta go. See y'all later.
yeah, man, it was great hanging out. And if anyone ever wants to, I guess the very last thing, if anyone ever wants to chat, or please feel free. You're more than welcome to reach out anytime. And
I might hit you up later with a status update or two.